139 teams from 64 schools have set their sights on Houston as part of the Urban Land Institute Gerald D. Hines Urban Design Competition, all with a plan for how to redevelop the soon-to-be vacant downtown U.S. Post Office property. Fresh ideas, a redesign of segments of our city, and a fresh look at a consistent issue, how to incorporate future development into our city's planning. Tonight, a look at urban development and the future of Houston. I'm Ernie Manous, and this is Houston 8. Joining us tonight are Gail Behrens, Senior Vice President, Urban Land Institute Education and Advisory Group; Andy Hines, Lecturer and Executive in Residence, Future Studies Program, University of Houston; and Guy Hagstadt, Blueprint Houston Board Member and Architect and Planning Consultant working on the Buffalo Bayou Park Extension. Before we start, remember, you can share your thoughts throughout the show on Twitter using hashtag Houston8. And welcome to all of you. First of all, Gail, let me start with you with the ULI competition. And as I understand it, as we said at the top of the show, you bring in these groups, and they're of college age and higher? Is that correct? It's
graduate students only.
Okay.
And the process starts actually in the fall. We have teams apply to participate in the competition because one of the big parts about the competition is that the teams have to be interdisciplinary. So they can't be all just designers. They have to be business people too. So they can have like a market reason for making their design decisions, which makes it a really unusual competition.
And you select through your organization a region, an area, a place in the U.S. for them to focus on each year?
Every year.
How did you pick us?
Well, the competition's been around for 10 years, and it was endowed by your local urban hero, Gerald Hines. And so we decided to spend our 10th year here in Houston.
Okay, and Andy, no relation, correct?
Unfortunately not.
Yeah.
So when these ideas come together, and then as we know, there are 4 finalists as we tape the show. By the time this airs tonight, it will have been decided already. So my question is, what are they looking at to decide a finalist, and what's coming out of these ideas that could be incorporated by the gentleman sitting on either side of you?
Well, the competition has 2 phases. So in February, the jury looked at 139 plans. So there's 139 plans out there for this site, in case anybody's interested. And they chose 4 of them to go forward. And now at this point, the students actually present an oral version of the plans to the jury. And that'll happen tomorrow on Friday. And the intention isn't really that they'll ever get built or that they'll go forward, but instead they're intended to sort of prompt some discussion, to maybe look at something different than the locals might look at.
So Guy, will you folks look at these plans to get some juices flowing, so to speak?
Oh, absolutely. The post office site has been on the radar screen for decades, and it's an incredible location in downtown Houston, so there's a lot of potential. And post office has been considering selling it, so something could happen.
Yeah. And of course, I have to wonder when it comes to all copyright and ownership and all that, if you decide that you like some elements of some plans, can you incorporate them freely? Or is it then it gets to, well, you looked at kind of if a screenplay gets read and then a movie is made similar to it, who has the right? Does that happen?
Yeah, I think you wouldn't want to incorporate things kind of whole cloth. And you wouldn't be able to, because actual conditions, financing, market conditions in a few years, whatever it may be, will cause things to change. But sure, you look at good ideas and try to incorporate kind of new thinking into your project, sure.
Andy, have you had any chance to look into any of these to see them?
I say that this fits in with one of the big trends that we're seeing in the business world towards co-creation and crowdsourcing, where organizations are actively going out and soliciting, because you can do it with information technology, they're actually soliciting these ideas. So I think that's right in line with some of the trends. And that's becoming an increasingly common way of incorporating innovative ideas.
This is going to be a very bizarre question to ask, and it came to me reading through the research on all this, and it's open for any of you that want to take it and run with it. We're looking at the growth of this city, and we talk about how Houston is going to continue to grow and how it's going to grow and what we should do to accommodate this growth, and also in this development to encourage new growth. Do we get to a point where we want to say, stop growing your city, bring it back down to a reasonable level, let other cities absorb, or is there always the benefit of wanting more, wanting bigger?
Well, I think we want bigger and better. And Houston, it's in our DNA to grow. So I don't think Houston is ready to adopt a attitude of resisting growth or stopping growth. It's really a question of how we're going to grow, and certainly these high-profile projects like the post office site are exciting, but 99% of the growth is going to occur out there, the bread and butter stuff that affects us and our lives every day, every Houstonian every day, and that side of the equation needs attention too.
But Gail, is growth always what a city should be looking at?
Well, I think they have to look at it differently than just we want to grow. But they have to think about how they want to grow in the suburban areas, like if they want to develop more urban nodes in suburban locations, and what kind of what that growth looks like.
Well, some cities have said, yes, that's enough.
Yeah.
Portland is being one example. Like we want to stop here. And Austin, right next to us, is a similar kind of decision. But I would agree with the idea of the nodes, right? It's not that we don't want to be one big, huge, but can we be 6 or 12 cities within a city?
Right. Well, the micro-city concept, where they talk about building these self-sustaining, smaller units within which contain your services and your work and your pleasure centers all in these smaller units.
Well, that's what the demographics and the market research are indicating. The Kinder Institute is coming out with the Houston Area Survey in just a few weeks. And for years, it's indicated that a sizable percentage of the Harris County population has been interested in living in an urban setting. The challenge is actually satisfying that demand based upon the kind of the realities of land prices and all that sort of thing. Certainly the urban nodes are a great concept to start with, but I think you also need to be looking at the whole picture of what's in those urban nodes, not just the housing part or the transportation part or the parks, but rather how they all need to work together, because today's marketplace is looking for a total experience, a total environment, not just individual pieces.
When people hear the word urban, they usually or often think of downtowns. That's their sort of mindset.
Right.
But in fact, most of the jobs aren't downtowns in a lot of metropolitan areas. They're out in the suburbs. And so there's an opportunity to create sort of downtowns in suburban areas by densifying some of those areas. In Washington, D.C., where I live, the suburbs have a lot of walkable urban areas with a lot of the same amenities that you get downtown.
Is there a unique challenge, though? And we did a show a while back on the mass transit in Houston, and an issue that came up was that the way the city developed and sprung up, where you didn't have a central business district. You had multiples of everything all over the place. So is our city unique and different than other major metropolitan cities, or is this a trend you're seeing in other cities?
I think it's not unusual in some of our newer cities. It tends to be a pattern that's repeated in some of the newer cities that, in fact, are trying to retrofit themselves to be more compact and have more of a sense of place.
So, Andy, do we take that into consideration when we look to what we're going to do for the future?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting opportunities that's upon us is the ability to connect remotely and virtual work, and everybody has an iPhone now, and we're getting used to working when we need to work, or doing things when we need to do it. We have one trend we call death of the schedule. That we don't follow traditional schedules anymore. So one of the interesting opportunities, do we need to commute from 8 to 5 to a downtown area? We really don't need to do it. We're doing it just out of habit. So when we take those new possibilities, can we reconfigure our schedules? It starts to make some of these challenges more manageable.
But if I don't need to commute to work, so to speak, and I can do it, I can log into my office, are we going to see population shifts like we have in the past? Is that going to go away? Is everything you need will be accessible to where you are?
Well, they've been predicting that for 20 years, and I think the experience is that people still are drawn to socialization. They're drawn to places where they can interact with other people, maybe not just for work and for getting a particular project done, but certainly for quality of life. And I think the challenge for Houston is to take these nodes that we've talked about and this pattern that we already have in spades. We don't just have downtown, we have uptown, and we have the West Chase area and Greens Point and the medical center, and make those places that will draw folks to them for the socialization, and through that we'll get a lot of interchange. We'll get exciting new ideas. That's what cities are about, and that's what we need to be focusing on with Houston.
I think, too, that I don't think people necessarily want to work at home, but I think they want more flexibility in how they work. So they want to have the option of working at home sometimes, the option of working in an office, the option of getting on a plane and going to meet with somebody face-to-face. Even the way the competition ran this year, we had a team that was made up of 2 students from Colorado and 3 from Harvard. And they did all their
And they
work
worked together in one team.
Yeah, and I think that's indicative of what people are looking for.
Looking at the plans that came together for the competition, did you see anything that you would term a fresh idea? Did you see something new that people, and it doesn't have to be in a finalist team, but was there something that really reinvented it, or was it just, and I hate to say it this way, more of the same?
Well, I think that, students do tend to think, across the board about more walkability, about sustainability, about creating a sense of place. And some of those, tend to start looking similar. But every site has its little anomalies and special things. And I think if you look at the plans, you'll see what they did with the bayou, for example, is pretty interesting. I haven't seen sort of any of that here downtown. Maybe in other parts of Houston I haven't seen.
I remember,
that.
God, maybe it was 10 years ago now, there was a big unveiling at the Wortham Center of this plan for what we were going to do with the bayou. It was going to be a 21-year plan or something like that. And I haven't seen it develop, but I keep thinking to myself, wow, had they started, we'd be halfway there by now.
We are halfway there.
We are. So they did follow that plan.
The plan is being implemented, and one of the challenges, especially in a city like Houston, we're kind of impatient. We want things to happen now, and to celebrate victories is that plan is being implemented over a course of decades. And the project I'm working on is part of that implementation. It's a $70 million investment in the
Explain a little
parkland
bit about
along Buffalo
what
Bayou.
exactly what area you're looking at and what you're looking to do with it.
Well, going back to the plan you talked about in the unveiling, there were 3 sectors identified: the section west of downtown out to Shepherd, the downtown area itself, and then the area of the bayou east of downtown down to the turning basin of the ship channel. And the Buffalo Bayou Partnership, which with the city and the county sponsored the plan, set about implementing piece by piece, building block by building block, that plan. So, of course, they need financial resources and support from the community, which only grows over time. And we're now at a point in this long process of the Buffalo Bayou Partnership having been able to join with the Kinder Foundation, which expressed its own interest as a catalyst funder in this project. And they're bringing $30 million on their own into this project. That's how it works. Yeah. And plans don't happen overnight. It requires patience, and it requires...
Are we on the same time schedule as was unveiled then, or has it been slowed a bit?
It's probably a little slower, but that doesn't mean that there's a problem. I mean, one of the big ideas for downtown was a bypass channel to help address flooding, not just in downtown, but upstream on Buffalo Bayou and White Oak Bayou. And that project is very real, and the Harris County Flood Control District has been very serious about studying it. Of course, there's the money issue. It's going to cost a lot of money. But yes, I mean, the plan is being implemented.
So when the students are putting together the program, I'll get you 1 second. Sure. Are they looking at what is actually the reality of what's going on, what his plans are for the future, then incorporating that into what they're doing?
Yes, or deciding not to, or just
sort of thinking
that they're aware of it, or they decide, well, maybe it should go in a different direction or something like that. They have that option. That's the beauty of it being an ideas competition.
Yeah, Andy, I cut you off a second.
No, I just wanted to add that as future, so we say, how do new ideas make it? Right, as we look back and say, working on lots of projects and seeing, what actually happens. I mean, the common pattern is that ideas start out one way and they morph and they morph and they morph, and that's the normal pattern. It's extremely rare that a fresh idea comes out of nowhere and gets implemented. That's the unusual case where we just take something and run with it, right?
In part too because it takes a long time to implement them, and the situations change, the economy changes, lifestyle preferences change, whatever, growth changes.
Well, and the market intervenes in the case of development, and what can look like a great idea through the power of the market, and the market is simply our citizens of our city, can say, well, no, we don't want this, we want that, and you're at risk if you don't, respect that.
And this is kind of a little off of that is an issue that came up when we were putting this show together. And I didn't want to book developers per se, because they have a project they want to see through. And what I'm wondering is, who is it that's looking out? Is there anyone that's looking out toward the future of our city and what should be being implemented, not necessarily what the marketplace wants? In some way, if you left it up to Houstonians, we want more shopping and more restaurants. But somebody's got to be doing some sort of master planning of 20 years from now, we're going to change in this way, and this is what needs to be there. Is there somebody doing that?
Andy, you want to start on that?
Sure. Well, yeah, certainly the Future Studies program looks at these things, but there's a group, the Center for Houston's Future, that has just done 2 scenarios for the future of Houston, and really 2 visions. And I think that's where, because ideas morph and the market intervenes, it's really important to have the vision and then be able to adjust as you go. I mean, to really lay out a step-by-step plan, almost impossible, right?
Right.
So it's that vision step that's really important. And there's one group that's doing it.
And Center for Houston's Future's work is very, very important. I think a very true statement about Houston is it's not that we have no plans. We actually have almost too many plans.
Right.
There are plans for every area of the city and organizations that are prepared to implement those plans under the right circumstances. I think really what's missing, great work on the sort of long-range scenarios with Center for Houston Future, is how do we bring it down to reality, and how do we get the city of Houston, and I'm talking about the city, not the region, to kind of working with citizen input, develop a vision for our city that we can all buy into,
Right.
and then a strategy for implementing that vision so that we can get from point A to point B, and we know where we're trying to get, and we can define what success is when we get there. That's missing.
But then who is it that, okay, you're the city council, and I'm a developer, and I want to build a 1,000 unit condo building on this piece of land, and city council knows it's going to bring in a lot of jobs, and it's going to be some money in. But long term, do we really need that? Who's judging things on that scale?
No one?
See, and that's the concern I have. If you're looking toward the future of an area and what needs to be there, and that's what I think is great about the competition, is you've got people that are thinking about just in concept of what should be there, as opposed to reality of we need money, we need jobs, we need development. Anyone take it.
One of the other programs that the Urban Land Institute has is one called Reality Check, and it's where we look at the whole metropolitan area and we bring together all the stakeholders from all the county, the cities, whatever, and they have to decide as a group where growth should be. And it's just a day-long exercise, and they do it visually with building blocks and things like that. But it does help the region think about, each node thinks about where they fit in the region.
And each one can take on its own role in that bigger picture. But you do need the broader framework that everyone can plug into. Mm-hmm. And Houston's doing great. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt. We're growing. We're kind of the envy of the nation right now. But I think there's concerns. You're not the only one who has concerns about, do we really know where we're headed, and whether each of these individual decisions that we're making on a day-to-day basis are going to help get us there. Right. Or are they going to take us off in this direction and we don't know it because we don't have that framework to plug each decision into. In
other cities, other areas, how is that decided? Is it the same challenge that we're facing here?
Sure. I mean, one strength and weakness we have is the zoning question, right? Some cities have zoning and they can kind of use those mechanisms, and our lack of it actually gives us some freedom, right? We can do mixed use and not have to worry about things that. Right. So the top-down approach would use zoning. So I think we would be a more decentralized, bottom-up. And the problem is, how do you coordinate that?
Right.
Without
the
and
authority.
I would contend that bottom-up approach is more about the 21st century than zoning is. Traditional zoning is, which is very much about the early 20th century.
Right.
And this, I think, jumping to zoning or any other specific tool that's used is a mistake. We need to step back and look at the strategy and the vision and the overall framework, and then decide, what tools do we need as a community to implement those. And I doubt it's going to be zoning. But I think there are a lot of other very interesting concepts out there. These are the kind of things that ULI studies all the time that could work for Houston and make Houston, with its changing demographics and its growth and its position in the country today, a model for urban growth in the 21st century.
We talk about looking to the future. We talk about what would Houston look like in 2030? How different will it be? Andy, from your point of view, will it really be any different, or will it be more of the same? Is it just kind of an exercise and, wow, this is fun to dream about, but we're not going to be the Jetsons. It's not going to look like that. It's basically going to look like that skyline behind you, just more of it.
Well, if you look historically, that's true. I mean, the appearances could indeed suggest that it's not going to look that much different. I think one of the questions is, are events going to intervene that make this sort of transition that we talked about to the smaller, more local kind of model? Our trends out there in terms of resources, environmental issues, energy. We know as futurists there are some growth issues that are out there. We don't know when. Mm-hmm. But if those kinds of questions come sooner, that could impact some of that takes some of these ideas from the nice to have to we need to do. Right now they're nice to have. We don't see any there's not a huge sense of urgency to make any transition.
But we need to keep in mind that between now, roughly, and the year 2035, 3 million more Houstonians are going to occupy land in this region. That's a huge change. It happens incrementally, so you don't notice it all the time.
And being uneducated, I would say, and I'll preface it with that it would be a lot more of the same if we're just talking about population growth. But I would say the bigger change, and correct me where I'm wrong here, is the technological advances we're making. The things that have changed in the last few years that, as you mentioned, the iPhones, those smartphones that we carry around with us, have changed so much how we do things. Imagine on a global level, as it's built into infrastructure of cities, of organizations, how that would alter us so much more than the influx of population.
Well, the technology certainly, but we need to keep in mind that Houston, the population, we're not the city we were 30 years ago. The demographics have basically been inverted, turned upside down. And
what exactly does that mean, though, when you say that?
Well, we are a majority-minority city.
Right.
There's no majority.
But does that change structurally an area?
Absolutely.
Why?
Post-World War II, and I contend no one did the post-World War II boom better than Houston. I mean, we were good at building suburban subdivisions and schools and homes. Today, the types of households that are looking for homes, a suburban home isn't going to capture anything like a majority of the market. You have folks who want to live in the central city. You have couples with no kids. You have people who are concerned about schools and where their kids are going to go to school. You have an aging population that needs mobility when they may not be able to drive anymore. So the market's becoming atomized, a lot like technology trends and social media.
Yep.
And we haven't really, in terms of our development processes, and I'm talking both in the private sector and on the governmental side, we haven't really adjusted to that kind of crazy mix of all kinds of things wanting to happen at the same time. It's a different century.
It is, and the growth in single households is across the U.S. is changing cities a lot too, because if you live alone, you have a different need for space. And you just think differently about transportation and not necessarily wanting to get in your car and stuff like that. And the growth in single-family households, it just keeps going up and up in the U.S. So
you see a trend like that, and then you look at what's happening in Houston, where the so-called urban zone regulations, which have today been restricted inside the loop, they're now discussing expanding them to the Beltway. Well, those urban regulations allow for denser development, smaller household or smaller units, and a different development pattern. And so it's playing out in the news, in terms of what this trend is doing. And it is fundamental change.
Andy, is there a city that's doing it well already that is a future city?
Yeah, we talked about that in the preparation. In Portland's,
I wasn't there, so I didn't know you talked about it.
Portland's been used as an example. Washington D.C. another example. That have thought through these issues of
And so, what
scale.
are they doing?
Well, in these cases, at least Portland, it is definitely a top-down, zoning-based. We don't want to grow anymore, and the focus is on quality of life, and the idea being if you want to get talent, right? I mean, to grow your economy, to get the high-tech talent, you got to provide a quality of life that people want to come live there. Because that one of the advantages of the use of information technology is you can kind of live where you want to live and you can work where you have to work. So then the physical place becomes really critical. So they've said, let's create a quality of life that will draw people, the talent that we need to come. So I think that's one of the key, how do you make a place that people want to live?
Yes, Guy?
Well, I think, having been born here, I think we want to celebrate Houston, though, and not try to import what is a great lifestyle for another city. And Blueprint Houston's been looking at this, and are there models here locally that we can build upon? And interestingly, Houston has an incredible track record with what are called municipal management districts, which are little mini governments in different areas of the city. And it's a lot.
Nodes, right?
And we're going to have to stop you right there. We are out of time, but we'll hold on to this tape, and 20 years from now, we'll see how accurate we all were. Thank you for coming in and joining us. Each week, we invite you to visit our home online at houstonpbs.org/Houston8. There you can read about the guests, learn more about the topic, and even watch past episodes. Next week on Houston 8, a celebration of nursing with 3 generations of nurses, all from the same Houston family, that of Dr. Denton Cooley. That's next Friday night at 8 p.m. right here on Channel 8. And that does it for us tonight. Until next time, I'm Ernie Manous. Thank you for joining us, and have a great week.